one of us, God has given us a certain type of ability, a certain type of strength that only you uniquely have it. Dr. Ramesh says that there are 7.4 billion people. The fact is, in that 7.4 billion people, there is not two people in this world that have the same fingerprint. And the same way with your strengths. Each one of us are wired differently, and the strengths that God is given to us is so that we can preach the gospel, so that we can be useful to other people's life, so that we can add values to other people's life. In a session before this, I say that a leader is born only when he starts to think about other people. And his leadership, your pastoral work, your ministry, it will only grow when you use your life and you dedicate it to add values to other people's life. The problem is, if we do not know what values we have, then the question is then, what type of added value that you can add to other people? Is this okay? Right? Is this okay? So because of that, how many of you have experienced this? I received Christ as my Lord and Savior when I was 12 years old. So my spiritual mentor, my spiritual dad, if you may, he's the type of person that come into my life. He has been a pastor. He has been a mentor for me since I was 12. Now I'm 36 years old. So all my life, he has been constantly present in my life. But when we meet, when we talk about life, he doesn't really have a lot of process. He doesn't really have a lot of curriculums. He brought me to go through a lot of different things in life. He brought me to go to a mission trip. He wanted me to experience, what walk with Jesus looks like. And that is my spiritual mentor. I live in the United States for 12 years. And now, so I have another spiritual mentor. He's my senior pastor that has been involved in my life since about 18 years ago until now. And in my journey with my pastor, it is a little bit different. Pastor is somebody that is highly educated, and so he's always have a curriculum that he is teaching me. When I go to a conference like this with him, he will tell me that there are 3 things that I want you to pay attention at on this conference. And I want you to come back to me and tell me how would that 3 things bring an influence, bring a difference to our local church. How many of you have experienced things like that? How many of you have experienced things like that? My question is this: which one's better? Sometimes I've met a lot of pastors, a lot of leaders that ask these questions in their heart or publicly asking those type of questions. Which one is better? Should I be the type of pastor that always facilitate the right answer, or should I be the type of leader that should be telling them the answer? And so these are the same questions that my partner and the company that we work with, Professor Dr. Houston, has 2 PhDs. The first one is in psychology, and the second one is in statistics. And with the knowledge that he has, he built the program that you all take, the ProScan survey. And in that ProScan survey, we want to divide them into 2 things. The first one is to help you to understand, if I can use the analogy of a vehicle, whether you are a city car, or whether you are a SUV, or if you are a racing car. The second part of the result that you will be looking at, we'll be talking about, now we know what type of car you are. Now we want to help you to understand what type of gasoline that you need to put inside the car so that the car can be used according to its purpose. Is that okay? All right? So now, if we can put it in the screen, the type of chart that you will all be seeing. You all have this type of report. You can see in the screen, yes? Okay? Now, if you look at it, on the top side where the blue color is, it tells you there is a dominance, extroversion, pace, and conformity, and then there's another section that says logic. So the first 5 columns, it describes of what type of vehicle you are. All right? The answer to that question, if it's not obvious, is that there is no better car. There is no better leadership. There is no better way to do something. It is just the way you are wired to do something. And that is God's given gift. That is God's given strength for each one of us. All right? Is this okay so far? Now, the first column, the so-called dominance, the dominance is your take charge trait, or it is your leadership style. Now, the person that we use in this example is Mohan. Mohan has been gracious to give us his profile for you all to see. Mohan has the first dot. If you look at the dots, the dot is high above the midline. If you see there's a midline in your report, and it says adaptable or flexible. If you look at Mohan's report, Mohan's bubble on the column for dominance is way above the midline. Is this okay? Now, by the raise of hands, how many of you have the first dot on above the midline like Mohan? Can you please raise your hand? So we got one. We got 1%, 2%. Okay. How many of you have the dot below the midline? Okay, a bunch of you. And what about the rest of you guys? Okay. All right. So you are still taking the survey. All right, got it. Okay, good. Okay, go. If your dot in the dominance column, which is the first column, if it is above the midline, this is what it says. It means that you are a type of leader. When you lead somebody, it is very natural for you, it is predictable for you to take charge and tell people what to do. It is not right, it is not wrong, it is just the way you are wired. Myself, my dominance is above the midline. And because my dominance above the midline, when the first time I met Dr. Richards, it is on our first meeting that I suggested to him that leaders can be equipped by using ProScan survey, Know Your Strengths. It is very normal and it's very predictable for somebody like myself to basically give out ideas and say that perhaps these are the three things that we can do. Now, if you have dominance, the bubble is below the midline. Now, it does not mean that it's negative. And if you are from the Eastern culture, especially, and I think it's a global phenomenon, we have often been trapped with this thinking that if you want to lead, you need to have that dominance bubble to be above the midline. Is this okay? But it is not true. Even when your dominance bubble is below the midline, what it simply means, even when you have the right answer, you want to facilitate the right answer. A good way to give an example on this one is, if for somebody like me where dominance is above the midline, the way I like to do things is I like to say things like, I believe that we all need to do our next mission project in Uganda. And I'm just simply telling you, I'm not necessarily asking for your opinion. For people with dominance below the midline, even when they understand, even as a pastor, for example, if he understands that this is what God has called me to do, the way he leads people, it is very easy for him to go inside the room and he will say things like, I have been hearing a lot of good things in Uganda, or I have been hearing a lot of sad stories in that region, and I feel that God is leading me to be in that situation. Now he's going to ask that magic questions of, what do you think? Now, if we do not understand, or culturally, if you are raised in a certain way and you are told that the only way of leadership is above the midline. In this conference, we have been talking a couple of times where people or leaders have burned out, and you felt like it is, I love the Lord, I love the work, I love the ministry, but I'm just having a burnout. Sometimes it is as simple as because you do not understand or you are not aware of the way you are wired when it comes to leadership. In Know Your Strengths, we believe that everybody can lead. I have people in my partnership that have dominance below the midline. And her name is Julia. She is my wife. She's my other partner. And Julia has dominance below the midline. Julia never told me, this is the things that I want to do for the weekend. Instead, she will be WhatsApping me or she will be sending me messages and asking me, oh, I've been hearing that this restaurant is really nice. In the early stages of my marriage, I thought like, oh, she's just telling me it's an FYI. So I want to go to the north, I am going to the north. After 16 years together, I realized that when Julia told me and says that I heard there's a good restaurant in the south, what she really tried to say is that I want to go to the south. Is that okay? Do you experience things like that in your ministry or in the church, in your organization? Yeah? Yeah? So this is something that we need to be aware of. Leadership is is big, and leadership is not always, there is no one right way. Now, whether you are above the midline or you are below the midline, it is not about positive or negative. It is not about active or passive. It just simply means that you are predictable in your leadership style. And if you are somewhere close in that middle line, that is what we call the flexible zone. And as it says flexible, it simply means that that trait is adaptable. It means that if you are currently on the top but you are close to the midline, it means that you can move to the up and to the below easily, much more easier than somebody like myself because my dominance is way above the midline. Does this make sense to everybody? Before I go move on, is this okay? Good. So that's the first column. The second column is your extroversion column, and that is how it is your people trait. It is how you meet people, how you interact with people. Somebody like myself, and including like Mohan, if we can show the screen one more time. People like Mohan, he has extroversion above the midline, and what it means is that he enjoys being in a conference like this. In a conference like this, he will be walking in the room, he'll be shaking people's hand, he say like, "Good morning, my name is David, I'm from Indonesia, how are you? Where do you come from?" And he's gonna keep on talking again and again and again. It is very natural for people with extroversion above the midline to be able to talk to any strangers as if that we've been friends for 15 years. Have you a friend like that? How many of you have extroversion above the midline? Can you raise your hands? So it's a bunch of you. Now, how many of you have extroversion below the midline? Okay, now, if you are below the midline, it does not make you an introvert. In Know Your Strengths, we do not recognize the word introvert. We recognize that you are a more reserved person. And people that are more reserved simply means that you observe before you have that pep talk. Is that okay? You observe the situation before you make that communication. The same way, I have extroversion above the midline. My wife has extroversion below the midline. And so, when I go to the church, after the church service is already done, I'm shaking everybody's hand. And I say, "What a beautiful Sunday." And I say, "What did you learn from the sermon today?" And I say things like, "What would you like to have for lunch?" And then after the fourth person and the seventh person and the eighth person, my wife starts to like poke me from the back. And he says, "I'm ready to go to the car. Let's go home." Right? Now, it happens in marriage. It happens in ministry. Sometimes you have pastors that's, I would say, highly bubbly and he's able to talk to everybody. And then there are certain pastors that just doesn't do things like that. My senior pastor right now in Jakarta is not in that category. He's more, but a little bit more like my wife. His extroversion below the midline. That does not make him a not effective pastor, not an effective teacher. It just simply means that he needs to observe before he actually makes a contact. And that is just a different way people are interacting. And one more time, if you are above the midline, it does not make it positive. And if it's below the midline, it also does not make it negative. Thank you. It's good. You saw the first four. That's your dominance, extroversion, pace, and conformity. And you see the midline. Thank you for the whiteboard. So now, if you are above the midline, this simply means that you are predictable. And if you are below the midline, this also means that you are predictable. And if you are in this range, then you are adaptable. So if you are predictable, it just simply means that that is the way you are wired. And a lot of people always tell me, especially because we live in a culture where we differentiate between what is extrovert and introvert. People with introversion often ask me, like, if I'm below the midline, can I bring it up? And the answer is, yes, you can. You can bring anything up because what we recognize is that you are flexible, that God has given you the ability to dial your personality, dial the way you talk to people. There is no such a thing as you are created in a certain way and you cannot move. However, what we are saying is that in the natural sense, in a normal day activity, if you are below, you are predictable in a certain way, and if you are above, you're also predictable in a certain way. Is this okay so far? Yeah? So the first one is dominance. The first one is how you lead, and the second one, extroversion, is how you relate with people, and the third one, the P, is your pace, and pace speaks about the patience that you have in doing something. How many of you have experienced something like this? You are in the office and you're doing a meeting, and then somebody comes with this big, brilliant idea. And once that idea comes out, somebody in the meeting, he says something like, well, before we go to the destination, we need to do A. And after A, we need to do B. And after B, I need to do C. I need to do D. And then the guy with the idea, he said, like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I couldn't care less about A, B, C, and D. All I care about is like, we got to do F. And then after F, we're going to do Z. Right? I understand the goal. The details are not important for me. How many of you have experienced that in the office? Right? Now, some people, like myself, my pace is below the midline, but is closing to the midline. And what it simply means is that it is adaptable. People with pace below the midline generally are fast moving. They have this big sense of urgency to get something done. I always say this, I say that, if you, just because God speaks to us, it does not mean that God wants to do it now. When God says that, Abraham, I will make you a great nation, it takes a few generations to make Abraham into a big nation. It does not always happen immediately. However, in terms of the way, the pace that we take to do something, there is such a thing as like somebody that have a higher sense of urgency, getting things done faster, and another guy that really wants to go through the ABCD of getting things done. And I know that generations in the church and also in the marketplace, we have take, pot shots upon each other and says that it is better to be fast or it's better to be taking things slowly. The fact is, for some of you, how many of you have pace above the midline? There is above up here. We got a couple. How many of you have below the midline? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. How many of you, if you are pace above the midline and you are in that meeting, and if somebody keep on giving that big picture ideas, but they never told you about the 7 steps to do it, how often do you get frustrated? And how often of you, if somebody comes in with a 40 pages plan, and if you are below the midline, and you are scratching your head, and you are asking that one simple question, what is the point of all this? This is the way we do things. And until we recognize what is our strengths, how we do things, we will never be able to add values to other people's life. Because we are distorted by our own things and by the way we do things. And so we lost the ability to actually add values to other people. And so if you're above the midline, the pace, your patience level, if I may, is higher. And if you're below, you are just slightly faster. You have a higher sense of urgency. I'm going to open this for Q&A later on, so let me just go to the fourth one. The fourth one is C for conformity. And conformity is your system trait. And if you are above the midline, like my wife, you are following a certain set of system. To be clear, I am below the midline. For somebody like me, I'm a free thinker. I'm a businessman, and even on my younger days, still young, but even on my younger days, I constantly always have a lot of ideas. I wanted to do this, I want to do new business, I want to do a new project, I want to be involved in this activity, and I'm constantly involved in all those things. And when I come home, and I told my wife, and I say that we're going to start a new business, my wife always asks me this question. Asks me questions like, how can it be successful? Who has done it before? Do you understand how to penetrate the market? Do you have the team? Do you have the money? He has like all these bunch of questions for me for one question, for one statement that I made, and I said, I want to be in a business. And people with conformity above the midline is wired that way. Because for them, it is important to understand, if I do something, who has done it before? What does the system say? But if you are conformity below the midline like myself, you don't really think that way. The way you're wired is that you just go ahead and do it and let things figure out. And when there is a problem, I'm going to fix it. That is just the way you're wired. Again and again and again, I find myself in a lot of sessions where people are arguing with each other, thinking about which one is better. The fact is, there are situations. If when you come to this Congress, if people ask you, if you don't have the tag, you go to the registration desk, you tell them, my name is David Tjokrorahardjo, I'm from Indonesia. They type your name. They can find your name in the system. How many of you want to be meeting with a guy behind that desk that have conformity above the midline? And so now he's going to ask you, when did you register? Oh, about 3 weeks ago. Well, not about 3 weeks ago. What I meant is like, when? Give me a date. Did you register with this email? And asking you another 7,000 questions about how did you register? Or would you rather to have somebody that look at you, they look at your face, they see Jesus on top of you, and he says like, oh, you are my brother and my sister. Sister, I love you. If you wait 5 minutes, I'm going to find your tag, I'm going to write something, and we'll find you out. How many of you want to be treated by the second person? Because the second person is designed for those type of volatile situations. But then like, if I ask you something, you have a church, you have an accounting. How many of you want the second guy to run your accounting? Right? Because these people have different strengths. It's not about who's right, who's wrong, which one is positive, which one is active. It's not about that. It is about which one is good for which situation. And so again, if I can wrap it up, the D, the dominance is how you lead. The extroversion is how you communicate with people. P is your patience level. C is your system trait. And the L, the fifth column, is what is called the logic. And the midline means balance. And above, if you are above, how many of you are above? Okay, a bunch of you. This is called fact-based. And if you're below, that's feel, which simply means that you are making your decision based on your intuition. And so logic speaks about your decision-making model. We all have to make decisions, and whether you like it or not, we either make decisions based on the facts that are given to you, or you make decisions based on what the environment is feeding your intuition. And so again, a lot of people start to say that it is better to do it one way or the other. For some of you, it is in balance. And in balance, it simply means that you can call for both. You can say that if I have the data, I can make the decision. Or if I need to use my feeling, if I need to use my intuition, that is okay as well. So that is the way you make your decision. Now, if you look at your chart, the level of, let's say, fact-based, some of you are like high up here, and some of you are lower. It just simply tells you how high is high and how low is low, how feel is feel and how fact is fact. And that is just the way you make decisions. My decision-making model is field-based. I have gone to a lot of conferences where I speak, and I still never have a PowerPoint slides. And the reason for that is because I know generally what I need to be saying, and I go there and I bring it. For some people, even if it's just having a coffee, and he wants to tell you about what we want to do next weekend, he has a PowerPoint slide. He will show you 7 slides of why we should be going to the lake next weekend. We will post pictures for you. And the reason for that is simply because the decision-making model is different. And these first 5 columns describe your strength in the sense of what type of car are you? When you look at each of this column, I want you to be thinking about two things. Number one is this something that you are good at? Is this something that you can do very good at? When you do it, is good results coming out from it? So the first one is, am I able to do it? But the second one is, do I like it? The first question is a question of performance. The second question is a question of passion, something that you want to do. And if I talk to you about passion, there are some people that can stand on this stage and you can speak and you can perform well. It's just that you hate the job. It is not going to be the first time when I meet pastors that go on the stage, deliver a great sermon. He walked down, I shake his hand, I say, Pastor, that was a wonderful sermon. I learned so much from you. And then he said, like, thank you, Brother David. And then he says, but if I can be honest with you, I don't want to do it one more time. There is a difference between what you are able to do with what you like to do. And even when you read at your chart, I think that there will be at least a couple of you that be saying that, well, this is really what I like to do, but this is not really something that I'm able to do. Because culture and the way we are nurtured and what people are saying about us, sometimes it corrupts the way that we look at things. I want to suggest to you that your strength is a combination of what you are able to do and what you like to do. If you like to do something, and this doesn't work for a lot of you, I think, but because I'm in a marketplace,